Hi everyone. I had never been a drinker. It wasn't a personal choice or some deep moral conviction. I simply didn't have the tolerance for it. A glass of wine, maybe two, and I was good. But on that particular evening, I found myself in the middle of a full-fledged dinner party. Friends, colleagues, some old university acquaintances, all gathered under one roof. I could feel the tension hanging in the air, but what made it worse was the one thing I hadn't expected: the subtle laughter. "Come on, Christian, you can't just nurse a glass of wine all night," my wife Laura said with a teasing tone, her lips curling into a smile. She had always been the life of the party, effortlessly charming everyone around her. The guests laughed, and for a moment, I joined in, but something in the back of my mind tugged at me. "How about a double whiskey?" she added, nudging the glass toward me with a playful wink. I hesitated, but I felt the pressure, both from the group and from my own insecurities. I didn't want to seem like a buzzkill, so I took the glass. The night carried on, but as the alcohol loosened my tongue, it seemed to tighten everything else. The jokes about my lack of drinking grew more frequent. Some were playful, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something cruel. Laura's laughter echoed in the background, and it made me uncomfortable. A simple moment that should have been filled with lightness now felt off-kilter. Something inside me shifted, but I couldn't quite place it. As the night wore on, I grew numb to the clinks of glasses and the bursts of laughter. The wine was too much, my head was spinning, but I pushed through. And then came the moment I would never forget. My son, Jonas, pulled me aside. He was barely 17, a quiet and thoughtful teenager who always seemed too mature for his age. His eyes, usually filled with a carefree innocence, now held a quiet intensity. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he whispered, pulling me toward the far end of the house, away from the main party. His voice cracked slightly. "Mom's been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a thunderclap. My vision blurred. The room seemed to close in around me. My mind raced as I tried to process what he just said. But my son's face, pale and tense, told me he wasn't lying. He was troubled, deeply so. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier, but I wasn't sure if you knew. I overheard them talking. She's been seeing someone for months." I wanted to say something, to respond with words that would make everything make sense again. But nothing came out. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, and I had to grip the nearby counter for support. Jonas' voice lowered. "It's not just that, Dad. She's been different. I saw her. I saw her texting him. Even here tonight. She hides it, but I know. I've seen enough to know." The shock didn't just sit in my chest. It clawed at my mind. I could see flashes of moments, tiny details I'd dismissed, now so glaringly obvious. The late nights at the office that Laura never explained. The distant look in her eyes when I spoke of our plans for the future. The way her phone screen would flicker when I walked into the room. Her sudden silence when I asked who she was texting. But the worst part? It wasn't just the betrayal. It was how perfectly she had hidden it from me. How easily she played the part of the devoted wife. I had been so caught up in my own world, my career, my successes in finance, the pressure to climb higher in the corporate ladder, that I never noticed the cracks in our marriage. And the worst part of it all? I hadn't noticed the cracks in myself. Laura had been my everything. The woman I married in a small chapel in Switzerland. The woman who stood by my side during the early struggles of our life. I had thought that we had built something solid, unbreakable. But now, I felt like an actor on stage, only realizing the script was a lie. It wasn't until later that night that I confronted Laura. The guests were still chatting in the next room, but I found her alone in the garden, staring at the moon as if she was searching for something in its cold glow. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't turn around at first. When she finally did, her eyes held nothing. No regret, no guilt, just a coldness that felt like a slap. "Take a moment to breathe. This journey is intense, and I know it's hitting deep. If you want to hear more about how our protagonist confronts the painful truth and rebuilds his life, subscribe to Lauren's story. You won't want to miss the rest of this emotional journey as it unfolds. Ready? Let's dive back in and see what happens next. What is it, Christian? Still sulking about your inability to drink? Her tone was dismissive, like she had already distanced herself from whatever connection we once had. But my son's words echoed in my mind, and I finally said it. I know, Laura. About you and him. About everything. Her face changed then. It wasn't the expression I had expected. There was no shock, no pleading. Instead, she looked resigned. How much do you know? She asked quietly, almost as if she were waiting for the punchline. She wasn't angry, just detached. I know enough, I replied. I know you've been seeing someone else, and I know you've been hiding it from me for months. She sighed and took a step toward me. Christian, it's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you. But things changed. People change. The words hung in the air, but they didn't make sense. The Laura I had married, the one who had promised to be my partner through thick and thin, was no longer there. In her place was a stranger, a woman who had already made peace with her betrayal. But even as the pain of the revelation hit me, there was a flicker of something else, something darker. A cold resolve started to form in my chest. I had been wronged, and I was done being the fool. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why him? She hesitated, as if weighing the answer, but then her lips curled into a smirk. Because he makes me feel alive again, Christian. I haven't felt alive in years. The air between us felt like it was suffocating, but I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the pretense. In the days that followed, I kept my distance from Laura, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. Not the kind of revenge you see in movies. Violent, dramatic, chaotic. No, I wasn't interested in that. I would strike where it would hurt the most. In the world she had so carefully built. I began with small, calculated moves. I secretly withdrew funds from the shared account, making sure to cover my tracks. I knew that the luxury lifestyle Laura enjoyed depended on her access to our finances. Then, I began subtly undermining her position at work, gently planting seeds of doubt about her capabilities among her colleagues. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted to take away the one thing she valued most. Her reputation. Weeks passed, and the cracks in Laura's life grew more and more visible. Her career was crumbling. The people she had once relied on were turning their backs on her. Her access to the luxuries she once took for granted began to fade. And through it all, I remained quiet, an observer in the background, watching as her world slowly fell apart. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Laura finally came to me, desperation written on her face. I don't know how much longer I can take this, she whispered. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? I looked at her, my heart devoid of the love it once held. I want nothing from you, Laura. I just wanted you to feel what it was like to lose everything. Because that's what you've done to me. And with that, I left her. I took my son and began anew. Stronger, wiser, but forever changed. As I moved on with my life, I realized something that had eluded me for so long. Betrayal doesn't come from a single moment. It's a slow, gradual thing, like the erosion of a cliff face, one grain of sand at a time. But revenge, when done right, is just the beginning of healing. Sometimes the greatest revenge, I once read, is simply moving on and finding happiness without the ones who tried to break you. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved you, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Lauren's story. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.